The rain hadn't stopped in 3 days. Detective Ellen Marsh sat alone in a storage room at the Atlanta Police Department, surrounded by boxes that smelled like old paper and forgotten promises. One box sat open in front of her. On the label in faded black marker were 4 words that had haunted her for years: Coleman's surrogacy homicide case. She hadn't touched this file in a long time. She'd told herself it was closed, done, justice served. But justice doesn't always sit quietly. Sometimes it knocks. You put an innocent woman in prison, the anonymous letter had said. No signature, no return address, just those 7 words and a photograph of a man everyone believed was dead. Ellen stared at the photo again. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up the case file. Inside were newspaper clippings, all from 4 years ago, headlines that had once gripped the entire city of Atlanta. 29-year-old surrogate charged in disappearance of wealthy businessman. $65,000 payment at center of shocking case. Baby removed from hospital hours after birth, mother behind bars. She remembered the night of the arrest like it was yesterday, the flashing lights, the rain-soaked street, a young pregnant woman standing on her porch in handcuffs, screaming words that Ellen had chosen not to believe. "I didn't do this, please somebody listen to me." Nobody had listened, including Ellen. Now 4 years later, sitting in this quiet room with new evidence in her hands, she wasn't so sure anymore. Across town, in a small apartment above a laundromat, Maya Coleman was folding towels. She was 29, no, 33 now. Prison had taken years off her life that no calendar could ever give back. Her once bright eyes now carried a permanent tiredness, the kind that comes from losing everything and slowly learning how to live with less. She lived alone. No family visited. No friends called. The world had already decided who she was long before she'd had the chance to explain herself. Maya didn't watch the news anymore. She didn't need to. She already knew what people thought of her, a woman who took $65,000 to carry someone else's child and allegedly destroyed a family to keep the money and the baby for herself. It didn't matter that the charges related to Daniel's disappearance were eventually dropped for lack of evidence. Didn't matter that she'd served time on lesser charges she barely understood, pressured into a plea deal by a lawyer who told her a trial would destroy her. In the eyes of Atlanta, she was still guilty. She always would be. A knock at the door pulled her out of her thoughts. She froze. Nobody ever knocked. She opened the door slowly and found herself face to face with the one person she never expected to see again. Detective Ellen Marsh. Maya's breath caught in her throat. Her hand tightened on the door frame. "What do you want?" she asked quietly, her voice sharp with old pain. Ellen held up the case file, rain dripping from the edges of her coat. "I think I made a mistake 4 years ago," she said, "and I think it's time somebody finally hears your side of the story." Maya stared at her for a long moment. Something in her chest, something she thought had died in a prison cell, flickered back to life. She stepped aside and let the detective in. Neither of them knew it yet, but the truth buried beneath that $65,000 contract was about to come apart, piece by piece, starting from the very beginning, back when Maya Coleman was just a desperate young woman with nothing left to lose. Maya poured 2 cups of coffee with shaking hands. She didn't offer one to Ellen right away. She just stood by the window, watching the rain streak down the glass, letting her mind drift back to a time before handcuffs, before headlines, before her whole world collapsed. 4 years earlier, life had looked very different. Atlanta 4 years ago. Maya Coleman was 29 years old and exhausted in a way that sleep could never fix. She worked 2 jobs, mornings at a diner off Cascade Road, nights cleaning offices downtown. Even with both paychecks combined, it wasn't enough. Not after her mother's cancer diagnosis. Not after the hospital bills started arriving faster than she could open them. Her mother had passed 6 months earlier, but the debt hadn't died with her. It had simply transferred itself onto Maya's shoulders, a weight she carried silently, the way she carried everything. She remembered sitting at her kitchen table late one night, bills spread out in front of her like a losing hand of cards. $22,000, that's what she owed. She stared at the number until it blurred through tears. "There has to be a way out of this," she whispered to the empty apartment. That's when she saw the ad glowing on her phone screen at 2 a.m., tucked between insomnia and desperation. "Become a surrogate, change your life, change theirs." She almost scrolled past it, but something made her stop. The agency called itself Golden Path Surrogacy. Their website was polished, professional, full of smiling couples and soft, comforting language about the miracle of life and financial freedom. Maya had never considered surrogacy before. She barely understood how it worked, but one number on that screen refused to let her look away. $65,000, enough to erase her mother's medical debt, enough to finally breathe. She applied that same night, hands trembling over the keyboard, heart pounding with something between hope and fear. The screening process moved faster than she expected. Medical exams, psychological evaluations, background checks. Within weeks, she was sitting across from a representative named Carol, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who spoke in calm, rehearsed sentences. "The couple is wealthy, respected, very serious about this," Carol had said, sliding a thick folder across the table. "They're prepared to compensate you generously for carrying their child." Maya remembered flipping through the contract, her eyes catching on words she barely understood, legal terms, clauses, conditions. But she kept coming back to one line printed in bold near the bottom. "Total compensation $65,000. You'll meet the intended parents before signing anything, Carol added. They're eager to meet you, actually. They've been waiting a long time for this. That night, alone in her apartment, Maya sat with the contract in front of her for hours. Her mother's face flickered in her memory, tired, apologetic, whispering, "I'm so sorry to leave you with this, baby." Maya picked up the pen, her hand trembled as she pressed it to the paper. "This is for you, Mom," she thought. "This is for both of us." She signed her name. She had no way of knowing that the two people waiting to meet her, a polished, powerful couple named Daniel and Renata Whitfield, would change the course of her life forever in ways far darker than she could ever imagine. The meeting took place in a glass-walled office on the top floor of a building in Buckhead, the kind of place where the air conditioning felt expensive. Maya remembered smoothing down her only nice dress in the elevator mirror, her stomach tight with nerves. She had no idea what kind of people were waiting for her upstairs. She only knew their name, Whitfield, and that it carried weight in Atlanta, the kind of weight that opened doors and silenced questions. When the elevator doors opened, she saw them standing by the window, backlit by the afternoon sun. Daniel Whitfield was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of easy smile that seemed built for cameras. He crossed the room first, hand extended, warmth in his eyes that felt almost too genuine for a man of his wealth. "Maya," he said, "thank you for coming. This means more to us than you know." Beside him stood Renata, elegant, sharp-featured, dressed in white from head to toe. Her smile arrived a half-second too late, like it had to be summoned rather than felt. "We've read your file," Renata said, her voice smooth and clipped. "Healthy, reliable, no complications in your medical history. That's reassuring." It sounded less like a compliment and more like an inspection. Over the next hour, the couple explained their story: years of failed fertility treatments, 2 devastating miscarriages, a desperate hope for a child that medicine alone couldn't give them. Daniel spoke with quiet emotion. Renata spoke with control, choosing every word like she was closing a business deal. "We'd like you to stay in the guest house on our estate during the pregnancy," Renata said toward the end. "For monitoring, proper nutrition, medical care, no unnecessary stress. We want everything to be perfect." Maya hesitated. "Stay there for the whole pregnancy. It's standard for high-value arrangements," Renata replied smoothly. "Consider it part of the compensation package." Daniel gave Maya a small, reassuring nod, as if silently telling her it would be all right. She signed the final agreement 2 weeks later. The Whitfield estate was unlike anything Maya had ever seen: iron gates, manicured gardens, a guest house bigger than her old apartment. For the first few weeks, it almost felt like a dream. Someone else cooked her meals. A private doctor checked on her twice a week. Daniel visited often, always kind, always curious about how she was feeling, always making her laugh with small, easy jokes that eased her nerves. Renata visited less, and when she did, the air in the room seemed to shift. One evening, Maya overheard something she wasn't meant to hear, voices carrying faintly through the open window of the main house. "You spend more time with her than you do with me," Renata's voice, low and cold. "She's carrying our child, Renata. Of course I check on her." Daniel's voice, tired, careful. "Our child," Renata repeated, like the words tasted bitter. "Don't get confused about whose child this really is, Daniel." A long, heavy silence followed. Maya stepped back from the window, her heart pounding, unsure of what she had just witnessed. The next morning, Renata appeared at the guest house with a tight smile and a folder of new house rules: visiting hours, monitored calls, restricted movement beyond the property. Daniel wasn't there to soften the edges this time. "This is for the baby's safety," Renata said simply, sliding the folder across the table. "I'm sure you understand." Maya nodded slowly, though something cold settled in her stomach. She didn't know it yet, but she had just stepped into the center of a marriage already cracking beneath its polished surface, and she was about to become the fault line that broke it wide open. The house rules didn't stop Daniel from visiting. If anything, he seemed to visit more, always finding small reasons: a book he thought Maya might like, a question about the nursery colors, an excuse to sit on the porch of the guest house as the sun went down. Weeks turned into months. Maya's belly grew rounder, and so did the strange, quiet bond forming between her and Daniel. It wasn't romantic, not in any way Maya would have called it that. But it was intimate in a different, quieter way, the kind of intimacy that grows between two lonely people who finally feel understood. "You know," Daniel said one evening, sitting across from her with 2 mugs of tea, "Renata and I used to talk like this, before all the treatments, before all the disappointment." Maya looked up. "What happened?" Daniel was quiet for a moment, staring into his mug like the answer was floating somewhere inside it. "Grief changes people," he said finally. "Made her harder, made me quieter. I think we forgot how to be soft with each other." Maya didn't respond right away. She understood grief better than most. She carried her mother's absence with her everywhere. "I lost my mom 6 months before I signed up for this," she said softly. "Sometimes I think I said yes because I needed to save someone, even if it wasn't her anymore." Daniel looked at her with something unguarded in his eyes. "You're saving more than you know, Maya, this baby. It's the first hope I've felt in years." It was a simple sentence, but it settled somewhere deep in Maya's chest, somewhere she hadn't expected. She told herself it was nothing, just 2 people bonded by circumstance, finding comfort in honest conversation. But some nights after Daniel left, she'd catch herself smiling at nothing, replaying his words long after the porch light shut off. Renata noticed everything. She noticed the length of Daniel's visits. She noticed the easy laughter drifting from the guest house windows. She noticed the way her husband's shoulders relaxed the moment he stepped onto that porch, a version of him she hadn't seen directed at her in years. One night, unable to sleep, she opened Daniel's laptop, still logged into the home security system. She scrolled through the guest house camera footage in silence, jaw tightening with every passing frame. Daniel laughing, Maya laughing back, nothing improper, nothing she could point to and call a crime. And yet it felt like betrayal all the same. She began checking more phone records, text messages. She told herself it was protective instinct, a mother-to-be's right to monitor the woman carrying her child. But deep down, it was something else entirely, fear. Fear that she was being replaced before her own child had even taken its first breath. One evening, she confronted Daniel in the kitchen, her voice low and controlled, the way it always was right before it wasn't. "You talk to her like she's your wife," Renata said. "She's carrying our baby, Renata. I'm allowed to care about her well-being." "Care is one thing." Renata's eyes were cold. "This is something else." Daniel didn't answer, and his silence said more than any argument could have. That night, Renata sat alone in her study, staring at printed phone records spread across her desk, calls between Daniel and Maya, longer and more frequent than she'd ever admit to finding acceptable. Something inside her, already fragile from years of disappointment and control slipping through her fingers, began to shift into something far more dangerous. She didn't know yet what she would do about it, but she knew with chilling certainty that things could not continue this way. 4 months into the pregnancy, the tension inside the Whitfield estate had stretched so thin it was bound to snap. It happened on a Thursday night, the kind of humid Atlanta evening where the air feels heavy before a storm even arrives. Maya was in the guest house, resting on the couch, one hand absently resting on her growing belly, when she heard it raised voices carrying across the dark lawn from the main house. She sat up slowly, heart quickening. Through the window, she could see shapes moving behind the curtains of the Whitfields' living room, sharp, angry silhouettes. A glass shattered somewhere inside, the sound sharp enough to cut through the thick night air. "You think I don't see what's happening?" Renata's voice, no longer controlled, no longer calm, it cracked with something raw and furious. "You've replaced me, Daniel, in our own home. That's not fair," Daniel shot back, his voice strained. "I have never once, don't you dare lie to me." Another crash. This time it sounded like something heavier, a vase, maybe, or a picture frame torn from the wall. "I have given you everything, every treatment, every failed attempt, every year of my life, and you give her your time like I don't exist anymore. She's carrying our child, Renata, our only chance, my only chance." Renata's voice broke into something desperate and jagged. "Not hers, never hers." Maya stood frozen at the window, one hand pressed against the cold glass, unsure whether to look away or keep watching. Something about the rawness of it all felt too dangerous to ignore. The front door of the main house burst open. Daniel stumbled out into the driveway, rain beginning to fall in heavy, cold sheets around him. He looked back once, his face pale beneath the porch light, jaw tight with something between anger and heartbreak. "I can't do this tonight," he said, loud enough for Renata to hear from the doorway. "I need air, I need to think." "Daniel, don't you walk away from me," Renata screamed after him, her silhouette shaking in the doorway. "Don't you dare." But he was already moving, disappearing down the long driveway and into the darkness beyond the gates, swallowed by rain and shadows. Maya watched until she couldn't see him anymore. Something cold settled in her chest, a feeling she couldn't quite name, but one that refused to leave. She didn't sleep much that night. By morning, the storm had passed, but something far worse had taken its place. Maya woke to the sound of sirens. She stepped outside the guest house, still in her robe, to find police cars parked along the driveway, their lights flashing silently against the wet gravel. Renata stood on the front porch of the main house, wrapped in a blanket, sobbing into the shoulder of a uniformed officer. "He never came home," Renata cried, her voice shaking, eyes wild with something that looked like grief or something far more calculated. "Daniel never came home last night." An officer approached Maya carefully, notepad in hand. "Ma'am, were you here last night? Did you see or hear anything unusual?" Before Maya could answer, Renata's head snapped toward her, eyes suddenly sharp beneath the tears. "Ask her," Renata said, pointing a trembling finger directly at Maya. "Ask her what she did to my husband." The words hit the morning air like a slap. Maya felt the blood drain from her face as every officer on that driveway turned to look at her, the pregnant surrogate standing alone, suddenly the center of a nightmare she didn't yet understand. She had no idea in that terrifying moment just how quickly her entire world was about to collapse around her. The investigation moved fast. Too fast, Maya would later think, though at the time she was too stunned to notice. Detectives searched the Whitfield estate for hours that morning, combing through the driveway, the garden, the edge of the woods beyond the gates. By early afternoon, they found something that changed everything. A torn scrap of fabric near the tree line, dark with a stain that lab tests would later confirm was Daniel's blood. Then inside the guest house, Maya's temporary home for the last 4 months, officers found the surrogacy contract, ripped nearly in half, shoved deep inside a kitchen drawer. Maya didn't remember tearing it, she barely remembered touching it since the day she signed it, but the most damning discovery came from her phone. Detective Ellen Marsh, young and sharp back then, had scrolled through the messages herself, brows furrowing deeper with every line. "You'll regret pushing me out of this family. I won't let you take everything from me. You'll be sorry, Daniel, I promise you that." Messages sent from Maya's number, timestamped the night of the argument. Messages Maya swore over and over that she never wrote. "That's not me," she told the officers, her voice trembling. "I didn't send those. Someone else had access to my phone. Please, you have to believe me." Nobody believed her. By nightfall, Atlanta PD had enough for a warrant. Maya was back in her small apartment above the laundromat when they came for her, the same apartment she'd returned to years later, worn down and changed forever. She heard the sirens before she saw the lights. Red and blue flashes bled through her thin curtains, painting the walls in flickering color like a slow-motion nightmare unfolding in real time. She stood frozen in her kitchen, one hand resting instinctively over her stomach, heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. The knock came sharp and heavy. Atlanta PD opened the door. She opened it with shaking hands, and in an instant, the small hallway filled with uniforms, flashlights, and shouted instructions. "Maya Coleman, you're under arrest for the assault and disappearance of Daniel Whitfield." "What?" The word came out broken, barely a whisper. No, there's been a mistake. I didn't do anything, I swear to you." They turned her gently but firmly, guiding her arms behind her back. The cold metal of the handcuffs closed around her wrists, and something inside her cracked wide open. "Please," she sobbed, rain from the open door misting against her face as neighbors gathered on the sidewalk, phones raised, capturing every second. "I'm pregnant, please somebody listen to me, I didn't hurt anyone." Nobody stopped, nobody listened. She screamed it again as they walked her down the steps, her voice cracking under the weight of disbelief and terror. "I didn't do this, please, I need someone to believe me." The red and blue lights spun silently across her tear-streaked face as she was lowered into the back of the patrol car, one hand still pressed protectively over her belly, as if she could shield the innocent life inside her from the storm crashing down around them both. Through the rain-streaked window, she caught one final glimpse of her apartment, dark, empty, and suddenly a world away. She had no idea, sitting in that cold patrol car with her wrists bound and her heart shattering, that this was only the beginning of a battle far crueler than she could have ever imagined, one that would take everything from her, including the child she hadn't even met yet. The courtroom was packed by the second week. News vans lined the street outside the Fulton County Courthouse, reporters fighting for the best angle to capture Maya's face as she walked in each morning, wrists free of cuffs but somehow still feeling bound. Her court-appointed lawyer, a tired man named Gary Pruitt, did his best. But he was outmatched from the very first day, facing a district attorney who spoke with the polish of someone who had already won the case in the eyes of the public. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," the prosecutor began, pacing slowly in front of the box, "this is a story about desperation turning into greed, about a woman drowning in debt who saw an opportunity not just for money, but for a family that wasn't hers to take." Maya sat rigid beside her lawyer, hands folded tightly over the small swell of her belly, listening to herself being rewritten into a monster. "The evidence will show," the prosecutor continued, "that Maya Coleman grew dangerously attached to Daniel Whitfield. That when she realized the family she'd inserted herself into would never truly be hers, she turned violent, threatening messages, torn contracts, blood at the scene, and a man who has not been seen since that night." Whispers rippled through the courtroom. Maya wanted to scream. She wanted to stand up and tell them everything, the late-night arguments she'd overheard, Renata's growing paranoia, the phone she swore had been tampered with. But Gary had warned her again and again, "Stay calm, let me handle this." It was harder than she ever imagined. Renata took the stand on the fourth day, dressed in soft gray, her hair pulled back in a way that made her look fragile, sympathetic, every inch the grieving wife. "Mrs. Whitfield," the prosecutor said gently, "can you describe your husband's relationship with the defendant in the weeks before his disappearance?" Renata's voice trembled, right on cue. "He spent so much time with her, more than felt normal. I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was just concern for the baby." A tear slid down her cheek, perfectly timed. "But I knew something was wrong, I could feel it." And the night of the argument. "He said he needed air," Renata whispered, dabbing at her eyes. "That's the last time I ever saw my husband. I've relived that night every single day since." The jury watched her with visible sympathy. Maya watched her with something closer to horror, recognizing the performance for exactly what it was and knowing with sickening certainty that no one else in that room could see it. When Gary rose for cross-examination, his questions felt weak against the weight of Renata's tears. The jury had already decided who the victim was, and it wasn't Maya. On the final day, before sentencing on the reduced charges her lawyer had convinced her to accept, Maya was given a chance to speak. She stood slowly, one hand resting on her belly, voice shaking but determined. "I didn't hurt Daniel," she said, looking directly at the jury. "I didn't send those messages. I didn't tear that contract. I came into this arrangement because I needed to save my family, not destroy someone else's." Her voice cracked, rising with desperation. "Please, I am carrying an innocent child. Whatever you believe about me, that baby didn't do anything wrong. Neither did I." She looked toward Renata, sitting composed in the front row, and for one brief moment something colder passed between them, a look Maya would replay in her mind for years to come. But it was too late. The damage had already been done, sealed inside 12 minds that had stopped listening long before Maya ever opened her mouth. The jury's verdict, when it came, would rip away everything she had left, including the one thing she hadn't even met yet. The verdict came on a Tuesday morning, delivered in a courtroom so silent Maya could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Guilty on the lesser charges obstruction and making threats, the jury unable to agree on anything tied directly to Daniel's disappearance, no body ever found, it didn't matter. In the eyes of Atlanta, in the eyes of everyone watching, she was already a monster. The sentence was 3 years, it felt like a lifetime. She gave birth 5 weeks later in a hospital room with 2 armed guards standing outside the door. Nobody had prepared her for how it would feel, the exhaustion, the fear, and underneath it all, a flicker of something soft and unstoppable the moment they placed her daughter in her arms. Tiny fingers, a quiet cry, a face that looked nothing like the nightmare surrounding her and everything like hope. "She's beautiful," Maya whispered, tears sliding down her face. "She's so beautiful." She had 30 minutes with her daughter before a nurse, eyes lowered in quiet apology, gently took the baby from her arms. "I'm sorry," the nurse murmured. "The custody order is very clear." "No, please, just a little longer," Maya begged, her voice breaking apart. "Please, she's mine, she's my daughter." But the surrogacy contract, the one she'd signed in desperation and hope 4 years earlier, gave her no legal claim at all. Renata Whitfield stood waiting in the hallway, dressed in soft white, arms already open to receive the baby like a prize finally collected. Maya's screams echoed down that hospital corridor long after the door had closed. Prison became a gray blur after that. She stopped counting days somewhere around the 2nd month. She stopped answering when other inmates asked about her case, tired of the same reactions, disbelief, judgment, or worse, pity. She stopped looking at herself in the small metal mirror bolted to her cell wall, unable to recognize the hollow-eyed woman staring back. Some nights she'd wake up convinced she could still feel her daughter's weight in her arms, only to open her eyes to cold concrete and the distant clang of steel doors. She'd press her hand against her empty stomach, aching for a life she was never given the chance to raise. A prison counselor, one of the few people who ever showed her real kindness, sat with her during one of the darkest weeks. "You have to find something to hold on to, Maya," the counselor said gently. "Or this place will take everything that's left of you." Maya stared at the floor for a long time before answering. "The truth," she finally whispered. "One day somebody is going to find out what really happened that night. I have to believe that. It's the only thing keeping me here." She didn't know when, she didn't know how. But somewhere deep inside the wreckage of everything she'd lost, Maya clung to that single fragile thread of hope, that the world had gotten it wrong and that one day someone would finally listen. She had no way of knowing that 4 years later, a rain-soaked knock on her apartment door would be the first sign that her prayer was finally being answered, and that the woman standing on the other side of that door held the very key to unlocking the truth she'd spent years praying for. Maya's apartment smelled like coffee and rain. Ellen sat across from her at the small kitchen table, the case file open between them, 4 years of silence finally beginning to unravel. "Tell me everything," Ellen said quietly. "From the beginning, I should have asked the first time." Maya did. She talked for nearly an hour, the overheard arguments, the tampered phone she swore she never touched, Renata's tears in that courtroom that had felt so wrong even then. Ellen listened without interrupting, jotting notes in a small pad, her stomach tightening with every new detail. When Maya finished, Ellen sat back, quiet for a long moment. "I need some time," she said finally, "but I promise you I'm not walking away from this again." Back at her own apartment that night, Ellen spread the entire case file across her dining table, forcing herself to look at it with fresh eyes, not as the detective who'd made the arrest, but as someone searching for what she might have missed. The first thing she found made her stomach drop. Buried in an old evidence log was a mention of security footage from a gas station half a mile from the Whitfield estate, timestamped the night of Daniel's disappearance. The footage had been requested during the original investigation and marked corrupted, unrecoverable before it was ever reviewed. Ellen frowned. Files didn't just corrupt themselves conveniently. She made a call to an old contact in digital forensics, someone who owed her a favor from years back. It took 2 days, but the answer came back clear. The file hadn't corrupted naturally. It had been deleted, and deleted intentionally, using an access code traced back to a home network, the Whitfield estate's home network. Ellen's hands went cold. Next, she found the anonymous letter that had first pulled her back into this, the one with Daniel's photograph. She'd assumed it was fake, a cruel prank. But forensic analysis of the photo's metadata told a different story. The image had been taken only 14 months ago in a small coastal town in Florida. Daniel Whitfield alive and well long after the world had declared him presumed dead. Her pulse quickened. She kept digging. The final piece came from an insurance database she had access to through an old favor. Renata Whitfield had filed a hefty life insurance claim on Daniel, nearly $2 million, but the timing stopped Ellen cold. The policy had been filed 6 weeks before Daniel's disappearance, not after. Ellen sat back in her chair, the weight of it settling over her like a physical thing pressing against her chest. A deleted security tape, a photograph proving Daniel was alive, an insurance claim filed suspiciously early. None of it had come up during the original trial because none of it had ever been properly investigated. Renata's tears, her perfect performance on the stand, had been enough to close the case before anyone thought to look deeper. Ellen thought of Maya's voice on the porch that first night, hollow with exhaustion. "I didn't do this. Please, somebody listen to me." Nobody had listened, including her. She stared at the photograph of Daniel one more time, his face older, sun-worn, unmistakably alive, and felt something harden inside her chest. Whatever fear or doubt she'd carried into reopening this case evaporated, replaced by something sharper. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she hadn't used in years, an old partner still working inside the department. "I need everything you can find on Renata Whitfield," Ellen said the moment he answered. "Financial records, phone activity, everything from the last 5 years. What's going on, Ellen?" She looked down at the case file, Daniel's photograph staring back at her from the coastal Florida town. "I think," she said slowly, "we're about to find out who really disappeared that night, and it wasn't who we thought." It took 4 days to build a case Ellen could actually use. Her old partner came through with financial records that told a story far uglier than anyone had imagined. Daniel Whitfield hadn't been the golden businessman Atlanta believed him to be. Behind the mansion and the tailored suits was a man drowning in debt, failed investments, a business on the verge of collapse, creditors circling closer every month. The Whitfields weren't rich anymore. They were desperate to look rich, which Ellen had learned over the years was often far more dangerous. The insurance policy, filed 6 weeks before Daniel's disappearance, was the loose thread that unraveled everything else. Wire transfers showed Renata moving money into an offshore account in the months leading up to that stormy night. And the deleted security footage, finally recovered by forensics, showed something the original investigation never saw: Daniel's car, parked calmly at that gas station an hour after he supposedly vanished. A duffel bag in his hand, no sign of struggle, no blood, no desperation. Just a man walking calmly toward a new life. Ellen arrived at the Whitfield estate on a gray Thursday afternoon, warrant in hand, 2 officers behind her. Renata answered the door herself, still composed, still polished, though something flickered behind her eyes the moment she saw the expression on Ellen's face. "Detective," Renata said carefully, "this is unexpected. We need to talk about Daniel," Ellen said, "the real story this time." They sat in the same living room where 4 years earlier glass had shattered during an argument that started this entire nightmare. Renata's hands folded tightly in her lap, knuckles pale. "I don't know what you think you found," Renata said, voice steady but brittle at the edges, "but my husband is dead. I've mourned him for 4 years. Ellen slid a photograph across the coffee table. Daniel, alive, standing on a sunlit dock in Florida 14 months ago. The room went silent. Renata stared at the photograph for a long time, her carefully constructed composure trembling at the edges like glass under pressure. "You faked his disappearance together," Ellen said quietly. "The debts were crushing you both. The insurance money was the only way out. And Maya was just convenient. A scared, pregnant woman with no power, no money, no one to defend her. The perfect person to blame." "You don't understand what it's like," Renata whispered, her voice cracking for the first time. "Watching everything you built disappear, watching your husband look at another woman like she was giving him something I couldn't. So you destroyed her life instead." Renata's hands began to shake. The mask she'd worn so perfectly in that courtroom 4 years ago finally split apart completely. "I didn't think it would go this far," she said, tears spilling freely now, no performance left in them. "Daniel said it would just be temporary. He'd disappear, we'd collect the insurance, quietly split the money, and then he'd come back once things settled. But once Maya was arrested, it was easier, cleaner. Nobody was looking for him anymore. Nobody was looking for the truth. An innocent woman spent years in prison," Ellen said, voice hard as stone. "She lost her daughter because of what you did." Renata closed her eyes, a single broken whisper escaping her lips. "I know." Ellen stood, nodding once to the officers behind her. "Renata Whitfield, you're under arrest for insurance fraud, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy." As the handcuffs clicked around Renata's wrists, the same cold metal Maya had felt on that rainy night 4 years earlier, Ellen felt something settle in her chest. Relief mixed with a grief that would never fully fade. Somewhere in Florida, a man who thought he'd escaped his old life was about to learn that the truth always finds its way home. And somewhere across Atlanta, a woman who had spent years praying for justice was about to hear 4 words that would change everything. "We found the truth." Daniel Whitfield was found 9 days later, living under a different name in a quiet coastal town in Florida, working part-time at a small marina, tanned and unbothered, as if the life he destroyed back in Atlanta belonged to someone else entirely. He didn't resist when local police showed up at his rented cottage. He simply set down the coffee cup in his hand, closed his eyes for a moment, and nodded, almost as if some part of him had been waiting for this day to come. "I always knew," he told Ellen quietly during questioning, "that this would catch up to me eventually. I just told myself it wouldn't." He was extradited back to Atlanta to face charges alongside Renata: fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. The same courtroom that had once convicted Maya Coleman on false assumptions now became the stage for the truth finally being spoken aloud, clearly, and without performance. Maya's exoneration hearing took place on a bright, quiet morning, sunlight spilling gently through the courthouse windows, a sharp contrast to the storm that had once taken everything from her. When the judge officially cleared her name, declaring her wrongfully convicted, Maya didn't scream or collapse the way she'd imagined she might during countless sleepless nights in her cell. She simply closed her eyes, tears sliding silently down her face, and allowed herself, for the first time in 4 years, to breathe without the crushing weight of injustice pressing against her chest. Ellen stood beside her that day not as the detective who once put her in handcuffs, but as the woman who had finally fought to set her free. "I'm sorry it took so long," Ellen said softly. Maya turned to her, eyes still wet but calmer than Ellen had ever seen them. "You came back, that's more than most people ever did." The custody battle for Maya's daughter, now 4 years old, moved faster than anyone expected once the truth came fully to light. Renata's parental rights were stripped the moment the conspiracy charges were confirmed. Maya remembered the day the courts finally allowed her supervised reunion, her hands trembling exactly the way they had the day she'd signed that surrogacy contract years ago, only this time trembling with hope instead of desperation. The little girl, dark curls and curious eyes, looked up at her hesitantly at first. "Hi," Maya whispered, kneeling slowly, her voice breaking. "I'm your mom. I've been looking for you for a very long time." The child studied her for a long, quiet moment and then stepped forward and wrapped her small arms around Maya's neck. Maya broke down completely, holding her daughter for the first time since that hospital room, sobbing into soft, dark curls, 4 years of pain finally beginning to loosen its grip on her chest. Justice, Maya would later say, doesn't always arrive on time. Sometimes it takes years. Sometimes it costs everything before it gives anything back. But somewhere between a torn contract, a deleted security tape, and one detective brave enough to admit she'd been wrong, the truth had finally found its way home. Maya Coleman didn't get back the years she lost. Nobody could give her that, but she got back her name, her freedom. And most importantly, she got back her daughter, the one good thing to come out of a nightmare that had almost cost her everything. Sometimes the truth takes its time, but it always finds its way to the surface. Thank you so much for watching this story until the very end. If it moved you, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and follow along for more true crime stories just like this one.